Do you really think that fancy purple shirt makes you the king around here, old man? Officer Nathaniel Cutler's voice was a venomous hiss, thick with condescension, in the moments before his fist slammed into the old man's face. Crack! The sickening sound of knuckle against cheekbone tore through the quiet afternoon air of Summit Creek Estates. Samuel Langston staggered backward. A constellation of bright crimson blood blossomed across the royal purple of his Italian silk shirt. "This is my place," Cutler growled, shaking out his hand, while neighbors watched in horror, their phones already recording. "You don't get to talk back to me. You don't get to exist here." He had no idea that the man he had just assaulted was Samuel Langston, a retired federal judge, and more importantly, the father of the only man in the state who could erase him from existence with a single phone call. Attorney General Dominic Langston. What happens when a power-drunk cop punches the father of the most powerful lawyer in the state? Where are you watching from? Hit like and subscribe to see Cold Justice Delivered. The sun of a Tuesday afternoon cast a warm golden glow over the carefully tended gardens of Summit Creek Estates. It was a neighborhood built on the quiet hum of wealth, a sanctuary of meticulously crafted brick mansions and sculpted Japanese maples, where the loudest sound was usually the polite whisper of a luxury electric sedan. For Samuel Langston, it was supposed to be a haven of peace. After decades on the federal bench, a life dedicated to untangling the complexities of law and human failings, retirement was an unfamiliar country he was only beginning to explore. He remained a man of principle and solid bearing. His posture was still as upright as the day he graduated from law school. His mind remained a finely tuned instrument of logic. Today's mission was simple: get to know the neighborhood. He drove with the unhurried grace of man no longer ruled by the clock. His car, a deep navy blue 1995 Lincoln Continental, was a relic from another era, a vessel of polished chrome and plush leather that floated over the asphalt. It stood out among the Teslas and Range Rovers, but Samuel appreciated it. It was a car designed for comfort, not speed, for contemplation, not aggression. He had moved into his son's guest house only a short time earlier, a wide, modern structure of glass and steel that contrasted sharply with his classic tastes. Dominic, his son, had insisted. "You're retired, Dad. No more rattling around in that big old house. Come live with us. Let us take care of you for a change." Dominic's work was demanding, a whirlwind of press conferences and high-stakes litigation that left little time for family. This was his way of closing that distance. Samuel wore a shirt the color of a twilight sky, a deep royal purple woven from Italian silk. It had been a gift from Dominic, a touch of vitality that stood out against his otherwise conservative wardrobe. It felt good against his skin, a small luxury in a life that had long prioritized duty over indulgence. As he turned onto the pristine, tree-lined stretch of Crestview Drive, his phone vibrated on the center console. He glanced at the screen, his cardiologist's office. He could not miss it. With a smooth, practiced motion, he signaled and brought the Lincoln to a stop against the curb. The long body of the car settled gently against the granite. The spot was empty, unmarked, and well clear of any driveway or intersection. A perfectly legal and considerate place to pull over. He answered the call, speaking Samuel Langston. The news was good. The results of his latest stress test were excellent. "Whatever you're doing in retirement, sir," the nurse said cheerfully, "keep doing it." A wave of relief washed over him. He smiled, a genuinely warm expression that softened the severe lines of his face. He was healthy. He was with his family. For the first time in a long while, the future felt like an open road. He thanked the nurse and hung up, allowing himself a moment simply to breathe in the sweet floral scent of the expensive neighborhood gardens. It was in that instant of quiet contemplation that a shadow fell across his car. He looked in the rearview mirror. A police cruiser. Unit 7 Charlie had stopped directly behind him, so close its heavy steel push bar nearly touched his bumper. The patrol car's high beams flared on, a blinding, aggressive glare that filled his mirror and blotted out the pleasant afternoon sun. The driver's door flew open. A man in an immaculate blue uniform stepped out. Even from a distance, Samuel could feel the waves of hostility radiating from him like heat off the pavement. The sanctuary, it seemed, had a serpent. Officer Nathaniel Cutler, badge number 7, considered Crestview Drive his personal territory. He was a tightly wound man whose uniform always seemed one size too small for his gym-built frame. He moved with a heavy, purposeful stride, a physical manifestation of his resentment. Summit Creek Estates was a paradox for him. He resented the effortless wealth of the residents, yet he guarded the neighborhood with a fierce, proprietary zeal. It was his kingdom of quiet streets and imposing mansions, and he was its undisputed and often invisible king. His partner, Officer Chris Riley, was a decade younger and barely a year out of the academy, but still carried the look of a man who believed in the mission to protect and serve. He sat in the passenger seat with tense posture, silently observing the volatile temper of his senior partner. He had learned quickly that on Cutler's shift, the law was whatever Cutler decided it was in any given moment. The stretch of curb where the Lincoln Continental sat us, in Cutler's mind, his throne room. It was an unmarked length of sidewalk with a perfect view of the intersection, shaded by a large oak. It was not an official rest spot, but it was his. It was where he ate lunch, where he took his unauthorized 10-minute breaks, where he felt the satisfying weight of his authority over the silent multi-million-dollar homes. Seeing the dark blue Lincoln sitting there was not a minor traffic issue. It was a personal affront. It was a peasant sitting on the king's throne. "Would you look at this guy?" Cutler muttered, the words a low growl in his chest. "Thinks he can park his grandpa's boat wherever he wants." Riley glanced over. "He's not blocking anything, Din. It's a legal spot." The words left his mouth before he could stop them, a reflexive defense of the regulations he had spent a year memorizing. Cutler shot him a look that could curdle milk. "It's my spot, Riley. That's the only law that matters right now. This is how it starts. You let them take an inch and they take the whole street. You have to remind them who's in charge." The combination of factors was a perfect storm for Cutler's prejudice. An old, expensive car that suggested unearned wealth, a black driver in a neighborhood that was overwhelmingly white. The ultimate transgression of existing in a space Cutler had claimed as his own. He was going to make an example of this man. He was not going to issue a warning. He was going to teach a lesson. He slammed the patrol car into park, the transmission protesting with a growl. He did not bother with the sun or the loudspeaker. Those were tools of official police work. This was personal. He climbed out of the car and slammed the door so hard it sent a bird flying from the nearby oak. He strode toward the Lincoln with one hand resting casually on the butt of his Glock, a practiced gesture of intimidation. The sun reflected off his aviator sunglasses, hiding his eyes, but not the sneer of contempt twisting his lips. I saw the elderly man behind the wheel. He saw the ridiculously bright purple shirt, and his contempt hardened into a cold, firm resolve. This man was about to have the worst day of his retirement. Instead of a polite tap on the glass, Officer Cutler's knuckles slammed hard against the driver's window of the Lincoln. Bong, bang. It was a percussive, demanding sound, designed to startle and intimidate. Samuel Langston, however, was not a man easily startled. He had faced killers in his courtroom. men whose eyes reflected a genuine and terrifying emptiness. This furious officer was merely a bully with a badge. He pressed the button, and the heavy window descended with a soft mechanical whisper. "Is there a problem, officer?" Samuel asked in a calm, serene voice, the deep, measured baritone of a man accustomed to being listened to. "You've got a big problem," Cutler snapped, leaning in and invading Samuel's space. His breath smelled of stale coffee and aggression. "You're parked in my spot." Samuel frowned slightly. He looked around, noting the sidewalk, the lawn, the complete absence of signage. "Your spot?" he repeated, a note of genuine confusion in his voice. "Officer, with all due respect, this appears to be a public street and a legal parking space. I see no fire hydrant, no driveway, no signs indicating any restriction." I was not arguing. He was stating facts the way he would in a courtroom. To Cutler, this quiet, logical rebuttal was like a lit match tossed into a pool of gasoline. The old man was not merely parking there, he was questioning his authority. He was talking back. "I am the sign," Cutler growled. "Now let me see your license and registration." Samuel maintained his composure. A lifetime of discipline kicked in. Never let them see you sweat. He reached slowly and deliberately into the glove box, his movements smooth and non-threatening. He retrieved the leather-bound folio containing his documents and held them out through the window. Cutler snatched them from his hand. He looked at the name on the driver's license. Samuel Aaron Langston. The name meant nothing to him. He was more interested in the address, which corresponded to a house in a different, less prosperous part of the state, still not updated. "You don't even live here," Cutler said, his voice thick with accusation. "What are you doing? Casing the neighborhood? Looking for packages to steal?" The accusation was so absurd, so blatantly prejudiced, that Samuel almost laughed. Instead, he simply answered, "I'm visiting my son. I just moved into his guest house down the street." In the patrol car, Officer Riley shifted uncomfortably. He could see the situation escalating over nothing. He pressed the microphone. 7 Charlie, maybe just ask him to move on, Din. It's not worth the paperwork." Cutler ignored him completely. He was locked in a battle of wills. He shoved the documents back at Samuel. "I don't care if you're visiting the damn Pope. You don't talk law to me. You think because you're driving a luxury car and wearing a $500 shirt, you're above the rules? You're not. You're in my world now." Samuel took his documents back. His patience was beginning to thin, but his control remained absolute. He had dealt with aggressive attorneys and arrogant witnesses for decades. He knew how to de-escalate. "Officer, I apologize if I've caused any inconvenience. I was on an important medical call. I will gladly leave." He reached for the gear shift. Cutler's hands shot out and slammed the car door shut, holding it closed. "You're not going anywhere until I say you're going somewhere. Now get out of the vehicle." It was no longer a request. It was an illegal order. An order given without probable cause, backed only by the threat of violence. The afternoon was no longer golden. It had turned ugly and dangerous. The order hung in the air, a flagrant abuse of power. Get out of the vehicle. Samuel Langston knew his rights with the same certainty that he knew his own name. He knew it was an illegal order. He could refuse. He could argue the finer points of Terry v. Ohio. He could turn this into a roadside legal debate. But he looked at Officer Cutler's face. He saw the bulging veins in the thick neck, the tick in the jaw, and he made a cold, hard calculation. This was no longer about the law. Cutler had transcended reason. This was about dominance. A physical confrontation was now inevitable. And Samuel, a man of intellect, not fists, knew he had to control the narrative of that confrontation. He would not give Cutler the excuse of resistance. Slowly, with the deliberate movements of a man demonstrating he had nothing to hide, Samuel unbuckled his seatbelt. "As you wish, officer. he said in a low, resigned murmur. He pushed the heavy door open, forcing Cutler to take a step back. He unfolded his long legs and stood, reaching his full height, something that seemed to surprise the officer slightly. He was old, but he was not frail. He stood upright, hands relaxed at his sides, his posture radiating a serene dignity that appeared to enrage Cutler even further. Neighbors were watching. A woman walking her dog had stopped a short distance away. A man watering his prize roses had turned off the hose. Cell phone cameras were raised, small black rectangles glittering in the sun. This was no longer a private dispute. It was a public spectacle, and Cutler was the star. "Think you're real smart, Grandpa?" Cutler asked with contempt, invading Samuel's personal space, and the air crackled with tension. "Think you can come into my town and do whatever you want?" "This is my town too," Samuel answered serenely, not blinking before the officer's furious glare. And I was not doing anything wrong. That was the final straw. The simple, undeniable truth of that statement broke something inside Cutler. His authority, built on fear and intimidation, had been challenged by the calm logic of an elderly man in a purple shirt. His rage, a burning, blinding force, took complete control. "I'll show you what's wrong," Cutler hissed through clenched teeth. He reached out and seized the silk of Samuel's shirt in a hard grip, yanking him forward, throwing him off balance. The delicate fabric stretched. The sound of threads tearing was almost lost beneath Cutler's grunt. He drew his right hand back. It was a clumsy, premeditated punch, driven by fury rather than technique. In another life, Samuel might have seen it coming. He might have moved. But he made a decision. He stood firm. He took the blow. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud, a wet, dry impact that echoed across the manicured lawn. Knuckle met bone. Samuel's head snapped violently to the side. A spray of bright red blood erupted from his split lip, painting an abstract, macabre pattern across the chest of his purple silk shirt. The contrast was terrifying and fascinating. He staggered backward. His legs buckled, but he did not fall. He braced himself against the polished fender of his Lincoln as the world spun for a moment. He tasted copper and wine. A deep, sharp ache exploded in his cheekbone. He shook his head once to clear it, and then, slowly and deliberately, turned to face his attacker. He spat a stream of blood onto the immaculate green grass. Cutler stood there breathing hard, fist still clenched, shaking out his hand. He had expected the old man to crumple. The fact that he was still standing, looking at him with those clear, unyielding eyes, unsettled him. For an instant, a stab of fear cut through his rage. What had he just done? The image was burned into the minds of everyone watching, both on the street and through the growing number of phone screens. The older, dignified man with the vibrant shirt, stained by blood, stood firm, while the uniformed officer panted like an animal. The assault had shattered the peace of the afternoon, but it had also locked the roles of victim and aggressor beyond any doubt. Officer Cutler, seeing the cell phone cameras and the stunned faces of the residents, realized his tactical error. He had not merely assaulted a man, he had done it in front of a dozen witnesses. Panic began to drown his adrenaline. He had to regain control of the story, and fast. The only way to do that was to justify the violence after the fact. "You're under arrest!" Cutler shouted, his voice a little too loud, a little too shrill. "Assault on an officer, resisting arrest." He lunged at Samuel, grabbing his arms to twist them behind his back. Samuel did not resist. He offered no struggle. He allowed his arms to be wrenched into a painful angle, his mind cold and clear. The physical pain was secondary. The legal record being created was primary. "Officer Riley, get over here and help me!" Cutler barked. Officer Chris Riley stumbled out of the passenger seat, pale and wide-eyed with shock. He had seen bar fights and domestic disputes, but he had never seen his partner, a sworn police officer, punch a calm, elderly man over a parking spot. This was wrong. Every fiber of his being screamed that this was wrong. "Tim, what are you doing?" Riley stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "He didn't touch you. I was taking a fighting stance. He was getting ready to swing," Cutler lied. The words came easily. "Now cuff him before he hurts someone." He shoved Samuel against the side of the Lincoln, face pressed against the warm glass of the window. Riley, caught between his conscience and the direct order of his senior officer, hesitated for a fatal second. Cutler glared at him. "Now, Riley." With trembling hands, Riley unclipped his handcuffs. As he approached, Samuel turned his head slightly. His voice, thick with blood, was rock steady. "Officer Riley," he said, making sure to use the rookie's name. "Note the time. It is now that your partner, Officer Cutler, struck me without provocation before initiating this arrest. You are a witness, son. Do not become an accomplice." The words hit Riley like a physical blow. Accomplice. The word echoed in his head. He looked from Samuel's bleeding lip to Cutler's furious face. He made his decision. It was the decision of a coward. He snapped the cold steel handcuffs onto Samuel's wrists, tightening them a little more than necessary, the way Cutler preferred. The metal dug into the thin skin of Samuel's wrists. "Do it, son," Samuel repeated, his voice carrying a strange paternal disappointment. "Follow your orders. Complete the record." Cutler shoved Samuel toward the back of the patrol car. He saw the woman with the poodle, Mrs. Gable. Hand over her mouth. Phone held steady. He met her eyes and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Witness. Just witness. I was no longer merely a man. He was evidence, and his arrest was the first exhibit in a trial that had already begun in his mind. The back of the patrol car was a cage of hard plastic and stale air. It smelled of cheap disinfectant, sour vomit, and the lingering metallic scent of fear. The door slammed shut, sealing Samuel Langston into the stifling heat. He sat upright, back straight, refusing to slump against the seat. The painfully tight handcuffs forced him into an unnatural posture, but he focused beyond the pain. His mind was a whirlwind of cold, tactical thought. He was no longer a retiree enjoying the sun. I was a prisoner, and the battle had moved from the street into the mind. He watched Officer Cutler climb back into the driver's seat with a triumphant grimace as he glanced in the rearview mirror. Cutler was high on the confrontation. The violence had reaffirmed his sense of power. "See, Riley," Cutler said, slamming the heel of his hand against the steering wheel. "That's how you handle these entitled bastards. You give them an inch, and they think they own you. You have to put the fear in them from the start." Officer Riley sat rigidly in the passenger seat, eyes fixed on the windshield, face full of conflict. He did not dare look at the bleeding man in the cage. His stomach churned. This had not been policing. This had been violence. "How is an old man, Din?" Riley said in a low voice, barely audible. He said he was on a medical call. "Yeah, right," Cutler scoffed, pulling away from the curb with a completely unnecessary squeal of tires. "Medical call, probably dealing drugs. That's the only reason his kind are in this neighborhood. Look at that shirt. Drug dealer. I can smell it." Samuel listened, recording every word. The profiling, the baseless accusations. All of it was being captured by the car's audio system. Cutler was building the prosecution's case for them, one hateful sentence at a time. Samuel decided it was time to press the weakest link. "Officer Riley," he said in a calm, resonant voice that cut through the road noise and made the young officer jump. "What is Officer Cutler's badge number?" Riley hesitated, turning his head slightly. "Shut up back there, criminal!" Cutler snapped, eyes flashing in the rear view. Samuel ignored him completely, focusing entirely on the rookie. "Officer Riley has a duty to identify a fellow officer when asked. I am requesting his badge number. I am also asking whether the dash camera and audio recording systems in this vehicle are operational." Riley swallowed. He knew the answer to both questions was yes. He knew he was required to provide the badge number. He was trapped between protocol and his partner's fury. "His badge is 729, Riley muttered, looking down at his lap. "And the camera is on." "Thank you, officer," Samuel said, with a tone of quiet approval. "Now, note for your future report that Officer Cutler is accusing me of being a drug dealer without the slightest evidence. Note also that he has not read me my Miranda rights. You are currently an accessory to kidnapping and the fabrication of probable cause for arrest." "Kidnapping," Cutler laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Listen to the big shot lawyer back there. You're going to the 4th precinct. You're going to be booked. You're going to spend the night in the drunk tank with the rest of the trash. End of story." The patrol car accelerated through the manicured streets of Summit Creek toward the grittier industrial edge of the city where the precinct stood. Samuel continued his quiet assault on Riley's conscience. "There's always a moment, son," Samuel said, his voice almost paternal. "A moment when you choose which side of the line you're on. You're in that moment right now. When we get to the station, they're going to ask you to write a report. You can write the truth, or you can write his lie. One path leads to a long career. The other leads to a cell in a federal prison as an accomplice. Choose carefully." The car remained silent for the rest of the ride, but the air was heavy with the weight of Riley's decision. Samuel closed his eyes. He had planted the seed of doubt. Now he only had to wait and see whether it would grow in the poisoned soil of the 4th District. The 4th Precinct was a grim, utilitarian brick building that seemed to absorb sunlight without reflecting it. It smelled of pine sawdust, burnt coffee, and decades of quiet despair. Cutler shoved Samuel through the rear door, an act of brutality performed for the benefit of the other officers in the booking area. The man behind the counter, Sergeant O'Connell, looked up from his crossword with an expression of profound boredom. He was a soft-bellied man with tired eyes, the gatekeeper of this small, miserable corner of the justice system. "What have you brought me, Din?" O'Connell asked in a rough, monotone voice. "Looks like you caught a big one today." "Found him in Summit Creek," Cutler announced proudly, shoving Samuel against the counter. "Thinks he's a big shot. Gave me a whole lecture on posture. Had to take him down. Assault on a peace officer. Resisting the whole way." O'Connell looked Samuel up and down. He saw the expensive purple shirt stained with blood, the tailored pants, the dignified and unyielding posture. He did not see a threat. He saw a nuisance. "Summit Creek, huh?" O'Connell chuckled without humor. "Let me guess. He told you he knows the mayor." He leaned toward his computer, fingers on the keyboard. "Well, let's get this over with. Name? Langston," Samuel said in a clear, firm voice. "Samuel Aaron Langston. Fancy," O'Connell muttered, typing slowly with 2 fingers. "Address? I just moved. My license has my previous address. My current residence is 1240 Crestview Drive." O'Connell stopped typing. He looked at Cutler and smirked. "That's the new glass monstrosity. The one that looks like an Apple store. That place belongs to the Attorney General." He turned back to Samuel. "You the gardener?" The insult was blatant, vague, and entirely predictable. Samuel did not take the bait. "I am a resident," O'Connell snorted. "Right. I'm not putting a fixed address. Makes the paperwork easier. You will do no such thing, Samuel said, his tone shifting. The quiet retiree had vanished, replaced by the commanding presence of a federal judge. You will enter the address I gave you. Falsifying a police report is a felony. I suggest you do not add another crime to the list you are compiling today. The change in tone made O'Connell pause, but Cutler stepped in, shoving Samuel's head forward. He doesn't give the orders here, O'Connell. I do. Put whatever you want. Now let's get his picture. I want to see his mugshot. They pushed him in front of the height chart on the wall. He stood tall, looking straight into the camera lens. He did not scowl or look away. He projected an aura of deep disappointment, as if the camera itself had failed some moral test. The flash fired, capturing the swelling on his cheek, the dark stain of blood on his shirt, the unyielding clarity in his eyes. Permanent digital evidence. They moved him to the fingerprint scanner. He pressed his fingers onto the glass. The machine hesitated and beeped. On O'Connell's screen, a small red flag appeared next to the fingerprint submission. Federal judicial marker. Restricted. Huh, O'Connell said, squinting at the screen. System's glitching. Says there's a federal marker on these prints. Some kind of error. He had seen similar flags for sitting judges or high-level federal employees before, but he dismissed them. This old man could not be a judge, not with Cutler treating him like this. He hit the override button. Stupid IT department, he muttered. Never fixes anything. Cutler grew impatient. Just process him and stick him in a cell. I want to write the report. A phone call, Samuel said in a firm voice. I have the right to a phone call. O'Connell jerked his thumb toward a filthy public phone on the wall. Go ahead. Call your lawyer. Tell him to bring a big bag of money. Bail for assaulting a cop is going to be high. Samuel walked to the phone, ignoring the stares of the other officers. The ticking of his identity remained silent, a secret he guarded carefully. They saw an old man, a problem, a number. They had no idea they had just locked up a storm. The interrogation room was a small, windowless box, painted a sickly institutional beige. The air was stale, and a single fluorescent bulb hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows. A metal table was bolted to the floor with 2 chairs on either side. It was a room designed to demoralize. Officer Cutler shoved Samuel into one of the chairs, feeling the cold metal against his back. Sit, he ordered, as if speaking to a dog. Cutler sat across from him, leaning forward like a predator, enjoying his cornered prey. He slid a pre-printed form across the table. It was filled with legal boilerplate, a standard waiver and admission of guilt form. Here's the deal, Langston, Cutler said, attempting a tone of magnanimous authority. You had a bad day. So did I. Let's make this easy. This form says you acted erratically. You admit to resisting, and you apologize for your aggressive behavior. You sign it. We drop the assault charge. You pay a disorderly conduct fine, and you're out of here in an hour. No jail. No problems. Everybody goes home. It was a classic trap, a bureaucratic weapon to cover up an illegal assault. Samuel's signature would validate Cutler's violence, close the case, and bury the truth under a pile of paper. Samuel looked down at the form, then at Cutler. His gaze was cold and analytical. Where is Officer Riley? He asked. The question caught Cutler off guard. What's he got to do with it? He demanded. He's a rookie. He's outside writing his report. My report? Samuel asked quietly. So you're instructing him on what to write? Subornation of perjury, another crime for the list. Cutler's face flushed with anger. Stop talking like a lawyer. You're not a lawyer. You're a criminal. Now, are you going to sign the paper or not? Samuel picked up the form and read it with an unreadable expression. For a moment, Cutler believed he had won. He thought the old man's spirit was finally breaking under the threat of a night in jail. "I need a pen," Samuel said. A triumphant smile spread across Cutler's face. "See, I knew you were a smart man," he said, pulling a cheap pen from his shirt pocket and clicking it open. He slid it across the table. "Sign on the bottom line. Press hard." Samuel took the pen. He held the paper firmly. He did not sign. Instead, with a powerful, deliberate motion, he drew a large, thick X that crossed the entire text from corner to corner. The force of the pen tore the cheap paper. He capped the pen, placed it carefully beside the ruined document, and slid both back across the table. "I refuse to sign your lie," Samuel said in a quiet but resonant voice. Cutler stared at the X, then at Samuel's calm, defiant face. The mocking smile vanished, replaced by a wave of pure, unfiltered rage. He slammed both fists onto the metal table. The sound echoed in the small room. "You stupid old man!" he roared, leaning so far over the table that his face was inches from Samuel's. "Do you know what you just did? I was giving you a way out. Now I'm going to bury you. I'll write a report that says you attacked me, that you were high on PCP, that I feared for my life. And who are they going to believe? A decorated officer or some washed-up nobody with a violent streak?" Samuel did not lean back. He did not flinch. "They will believe the truth, officer," he said. "And the truth is not on your side. You see, you believe this room is your space of power. You believe that because you have the keys and the gun, you control the outcome. But you have made a grave mistake." "And what's that?" Cutler asked with contempt. Samuel leaned slightly forward. "You assumed I was the only one being interrogated in this room." The statement hung in the air. A chilling, incomprehensible threat. Cutler stared at him. A flicker of genuine confusion and perhaps fear finally reflected in his eyes. The old man was not broken. He was not even afraid. He was judging him. The standoff in the interrogation room was broken by the creak of the door. Sergeant O'Connell poked his head in impatiently. "You done with him, Din? Cells are filling up. We need to move him." The interruption broke Cutler's rage-fueled trance. He stood, kicking the chair backward. "Yeah, we're done," he spat, glaring at Samuel. "He's all yours. Stick him in isolation." He refused to cooperate. As they led Samuel out, his request for a phone call was no longer a right being offered, but a bureaucratic formality that had to be completed. O'Connell pointed again to the battered public phone in the booking area. "One call, 5 minutes, make it count." 2 officers stood watching him, their expressions a mixture of contempt and curiosity. They expected him to call a bondsman, an overworked local lawyer, or a panicked family member. They were used to the sounds of desperation that came from that phone. Pleas for money, tearful explanations. Samuel picked up the heavy, greasy receiver. He ignored the dial tone for a moment, his mind working with precision. He had a move to make, an arrow to fire. It had to be perfect. He did not dial a local number. He did not dial a number that could be easily traced to a law firm or a house. He dialed a 10-digit number from memory, a number that connected to a secure, exclusive line in a majestic government building 200 miles away in the state capital. It was a number he had never used before, a line reserved for the most serious emergencies. The phone rang only once before a professional, crisp voice answered. "Bands." It was a statement, not a question. There was no secretary, no automated menu. Only the direct, powerful voice of his son. "David," Samuel said in a serene voice that betrayed none of the pain or humiliation of the last hour. "It's your father." There was a pause on the other end. Dominic Langston's life was a series of scheduled calls and planned meetings. An unscheduled call from his father on this private line was an immediate red flag alarm. Dad, what's wrong? Are you okay? The concern in his son's voice was a balm, but Samuel had to stay focused. He could not afford him. He had to deliver the message. I am in custody, David, Samuel said, speaking in a low, calm voice. He knew the station was likely recording the call. I am at the 4th Precinct, City of Greenfield. There has been an incident. Custody? What are you talking about? What incident? Dominic's voice sharpened, losing its familial warmth and taking on the cutting tone of a prosecutor. There was a disagreement over a traffic stop, Samuel said, choosing his words with extreme care. The situation escalated. The arresting officer overstepped. He paused, then delivered the key information in code. David, do you remember the case we discussed last Christmas? The one from Philadelphia? Commonwealth v. Smith. There was another silence on the line. Samuel could almost hear the gears turning in his son's brilliant legal mind. Commonwealth v. Smith was not a famous case. It was a relatively obscure civil rights lawsuit they had debated as a thought experiment. An officer who fabricated evidence after an illegal assault. A case in which the entire command structure of the precinct was found complicit in the cover-up. It was their code. It meant this was not a mistake. It was a crime, and they were trying to hide it. The change in his son's voice was instantaneous. It became ice cold. I understand, Dad. I understand perfectly. Are you injured? Split lip, bruised cheek. Nothing permanent, Samuel said. Only my shirt is ruined. The purple one you gave me. That personal detail, seemingly so out of place, was the final signal. It conveyed the personal nature of the insult, the disrespect. It was everything Dominic needed to hear. Do not say another word to anyone, Dominic ordered with contained, low-voiced fury. Do not sign anything. Do not answer any questions. I've got this. I'm handling it now. I know, son, Samuel said. Time's up, O'Connell barked from the desk. Samuel carefully replaced the receiver. The call had lasted less than 90 seconds. He turned around. Cutler was watching him with a mocking smile. Who was that? Your mommy? Or did you call the NAACP to come cry for you? Samuel looked at the man who had punched him, the man who had tried to break him. He felt a deep pity for him. The officer was a pawn in a game he did not even know he was playing. He had just punched a man, but he had declared war on an institution, and that institution was about to bring the sky down on him. I called my son, Samuel said quietly. 200 miles away, in a spacious corner office overlooking the state capitol, Attorney General Dominic Langston stood frozen with the secure phone still pressed to his ear. The click of the disconnected line echoed in the silent room. He slowly lowered the receiver, his hand steady, but a storm of pure, cold fury roared in his eyes. I was a man who lived in a world of calculated moves, political maneuvers, and carefully crafted press releases. This was not a everything's fine, right situation, and it would not be fine until he said it was. Get me the head of the State Investigations Bureau on my private line right now, he said, and get me the director of the Cybercrimes Unit. Tell him to prepare for a complete data seizure. I want a warrant for the entire 4th Precinct of the Greenfield Police Department. Probable cause: kidnapping, assault on an elderly person, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. There was a stunned silence, then a hurried, "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Dominic unlocked a drawer in his desk and pulled out a laptop. It was not a standard government machine. It was an encrypted, hardened device that connected directly to the state's most powerful surveillance and data networks. He was the Attorney General, the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the state. The systems designed to catch criminals were now being aimed like a weapon at a small, corrupt precinct. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his legal mind working with terrifying speed and precision. He was not merely a son seeking revenge. He was the embodiment of the law, and that law had been grievously violated. He pulled the public records of the Greenfield Police Department. He found Officer Nathaniel Cutler, badge 729. He saw the photograph, the petulant, arrogant face. He cross-referenced it with the Internal Affairs database. A pattern emerged. 12 complaints of excessive force in 5 years, all dismissed, all filed by minority citizens. Cutler was not a good cop who had made a mistake. He was a predator who had been allowed to hunt for years. Dominic clenched his jaw. This was no longer only about Cutler. It was about his commanding officer, the desk sergeant, the entire rotten structure that enabled and protected him. He was going to tear the building down brick by brick and salt the earth where it stood. "Sir, Director Evans is on line 1, his assistant Jessica said over the intercom. Dominic answered. "Director," he said in an icy voice, "I have a Code 1 situation, the hostile detention of a protected person. I am activating the Attorney General's Special Response Team. I want a convoy of unmarked vehicles on the road to Greenfield within the next 10 minutes. Full tactical gear. I want a perimeter established around the 4th precinct. No one in, no one out. Lock it down." "Understood, Mr. Attorney General," the director answered without questions, and an emergency order from the Attorney General was the highest priority. Dominic hung up. He looked at a framed photograph on his desk. It was of him and his father standing on the courthouse steps. The day Dominic was sworn in as Attorney General. His father's hand rested on his shoulder, eyes full of pride. They were going to pay. All of them were going to pay. The storm was gathering, and Greenfield had no idea it was about to be erased. Back at the 4th precinct, Officer Nathaniel Cutler felt confident. He was in the report writing room, a cramped space that smelled of stale donuts, typing his version of events. It was a work of fiction that portrayed Samuel Langston as a deranged, aggressive old man who had initiated the physical confrontation. He described how the man had lunged at him, forcing Cutler to use a necessary and controlled strike to neutralize the threat. I had ordered a nervous Officer Riley to write a corroborating statement. The old man was in a cell. To Cutler, the truth was whatever he typed on that screen. He was the author of reality. He clicked save. An error message appeared. Network error. Could not connect to server. Cutler frowned and tried again. The same message. "Damn system," he muttered. He looked over at another officer who was frantically clicking his mouse. "Hey, is your computer working?" "No," the officer answered. "Everything just froze. Can't even open a file." In the booking area, Sergeant O'Connell was trying to answer a ringing phone. He picked it up. Absolute silence. The line was completely dead. He tried another line. Same result. "What the hell?" he muttered. "Phones are down." Suddenly, every monitor in the precinct flickered. The familiar blue background of their interface disappeared, replaced by a black screen. In the center, a pure white seal appeared, the official seal of the State Attorney General's office. Beneath it, in bold letters, a message began typing itself, character by character. "This system is now under the control of the Attorney General's Cybercrimes Unit. All data is being preserved. Do not attempt to power down your terminal. Do not attempt to interfere. Your actions are being recorded." A wave of confusion and fear swept through the precinct. Officers stood up from their desks, staring at the screens in disbelief. This was impossible. It looked like something out of a movie. In the basement Ida room, the precinct's server racks, which normally hummed with a soft drone, suddenly came alive. The fan spun up to full speed, sounding like a jet engine. Green and amber lights flashed in a frantic, chaotic rhythm. Data was not being written. It was being extracted, ripped out at incredible speed through a security backdoor the Attorney General's office had built into every municipal system in the state for emergencies. Exactly like this. Cutler's falsified report, the one he had just tried to save, was copied. The original, unaltered dash camera recording from his patrol car was copied. The rear seat audio was copied. Years of internal affairs files, emails, and case reports. A ghost in the machine was sucking the entire digital essence of the 4th Precinct dry. Cutler ran from the report room into the main area, his face ashen. He saw the Attorney General's seal on every screen. His swagger evaporated, replaced by a cold, sickening fear. The phone call. The old man's calm, chilling demeanor. It all crashed down on him at once. This was not some random vagrant. He had made a mistake, a terrible, life-ruining mistake. Langston, he whispered. The name suddenly tasted like poison. He thought of the address, the house that looked like an Apple store, the Attorney General's house. Oh God. His first instinct was to destroy the evidence, the physical evidence, the memory card from the dash camera. "Riley!" he shouted at his partner, who stood frozen, staring at the screen. "The patrol car! We have to wipe the card!" He started toward the door, a look of desperate, wild panic in his eyes. But before he could take 2 steps, the sound began. A deep, rhythmic thumping that was felt more than heard. Thump, thump, thump. It grew louder, vibrating through the floor, rattling the window frames. It was the sound of helicopters approaching, except there were no helicopters. It was the sound of heavy tactical vehicles racing toward them. Sergeant O'Connell, a man who had worked this desk for 20 years, walked to the front window and peered through the blinds. His face went slack with shock. "Din," he said, his voice cracking. "You need to see this." The ghost in the machine had finished. The cavalry had arrived. The view from the front windows of the 4th Precinct was one of terrifying, coordinated power. A convoy of 5 identical, unpainted Chevrolet Suburbans stopped in a perfect V formation, blocking the entire street and the entrance to the station parking lot. There were no flashing lights, no sirens. The silence of their arrival was more threatening than any wail. The doors of the trucks opened in unison. Men poured out, moving with a fluid, disciplined speed that made the local officers look like amateurs. They did not wear standard police uniforms. They wore black tactical gear, body armor, helmets, and vests with the bold yellow letters, "State Investigator," stamped across the chest and back. They carried short-barreled carbines, ready and held low, their movements precise and efficient. 1A team deployed, creating a secure perimeter around the building. Another team, led by a tall, stern-faced man in a suit, began advancing toward the main door. "Lock the doors! Lock the doors!" Cutler screamed in panic. Sergeant O'Connell, fumbling with a ring of keys, managed to throw the bolt on the glass doors, just as the lead investigators reached the steps. The man in the suit did not stop. He did not knock. He did not produce a warrant. He simply nodded to the heavy-set man behind him, who carried a hydraulic breaching tool. "State investigators," the man in the suit shouted. His voice carried easily through the glass. "Open the door, now." "You can't come in," O'Connell shouted, his voice breaking. "This is a police station. You need a warrant." The one in the suit held up his phone. On the screen was a PDF of a freshly signed warrant bearing a federal judge's signature. "I have one," he said calmly. "You have 3 seconds to open this door before I open it." Before O'Connell could process the order, the man with the breaching tool stepped forward. He set the jaws against the lock mechanism. With a sharp hydraulic hiss, the steel jaws closed. Crunch. The entire lock, along with a section of the metal door frame, tore free with a shriek of twisted metal. The glass door swung inward, useless. The investigators poured into the lobby with weapons raised. "Nobody move! Hands where I can see them!" The officers of the 4th Precinct, accustomed to being the ones giving orders, stood frozen. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. Their small kingdom had just been invaded by a superior army. One by one, they raised their hands. The man in the suit, lead investigator Mark Ramsey, strode purposefully into the center of the room, his gaze sweeping the faces of the stunned officers. "I have a warrant for the seizure of this entire facility and all its assets," he announced in a voice that demanded absolute silence. "We are conducting a federal civil rights investigation. All of you will be detained and questioned. Your weapons will be secured." He looked directly at Cutler, whose face had gone deathly pale. "I'm looking for Officer Nathaniel Cutler." Cutler felt a dozen pairs of eyes lock onto him. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. He slowly lowered his hands. Ramsey gestured to 2 of his men. "That's him." The 2 investigators approached, seized Cutler's arms, and forced them behind his back. They did not use standard handcuffs. They used high-strength plastic flex cuffs, cinching them tightly as they led him away. The heavy main doors, which had been forced wide open, framed a new figure. A man in an impeccably tailored dark suit entered, his face a mask of cold, contained fury. It was Attorney General Dominic Langston. He had come to personally oversee the demolition. The room sank even deeper into silence. The king had come to witness the fall of the traitors. Attorney General Dominic Langston walked through the lobby of the 4th Precinct as if he owned it, which, for all practical purposes, he now did. The air was thick with the stunned silence of the local officers and the quiet professionalism of his investigators. His gaze, cold and sharp as flint chips, swept the room, cataloging every detail. He saw the fear on the faces of the rank and file, the pathetic, crumbling swagger of Sergeant O'Connell, and the wild, terrified eyes of Nathaniel Cutler, who was being held firmly by 2 state agents. But Dominic was not looking for them. He was looking for one man. Investigator Ramsey met him in the center of the room. "Sir, the scene is secure. All personnel are detained." "Where is he?" Dominic asked in a low, tight voice. "In the holding cells, sir," Ramsey answered, pointing down a gray hallway. "He's uninjured, aside from the initial injuries." Dominic gave a single, sharp nod. He walked down the hallway, his polished shoes clicking on the linoleum, a sound that echoed like the ticking of a clock. He reached the detention area. Through the bars of a small cell, he saw him. His father, Samuel Langston, sat on a hard metal bench. He was not slumped. He sat with his back straight, hands resting on his knees, a portrait of unbreakable dignity. The blood had dried on his purple shirt, a dark, ugly stain. His lip was swollen, and a deep purple bruise was beginning to form on his cheekbone. Dominic stopped in front of the cell. He looked at his father's face. In that moment, he was not the Attorney General. He was only a son. Seeing the man who was his hero, his moral compass, battered and caged, a wave of pain and rage so deep it nearly buckled his knees, washed over him. He had dedicated his career to putting violent men behind bars, but he had never felt a fury so personal, so primal. Samuel looked up. Their eyes met through the steel bars. He did not look broken or frightened. He looked tired, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence, the same serene strength as always. He gave his son a small, almost imperceptible nod, a nod that said, "I'm fine, now do your job." An investigator hurried forward with a key and unlocked the cell door. It swung open with a loud creak. Dominic stepped inside. He did not speak. He reached out and gently touched his father's bruised cheek. Samuel flinched slightly at the contact. "I'm all right, David," Samuel whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm just angry." "I know," Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm angry too." He helped his father to his feet. As they walked out of the cell block and back into the main lobby, a silence fell over the room. Every officer, every agent watched as the most powerful lawyer in the state carefully guided his elderly, injured father through the precinct. The image was devastating. It was a vivid portrait of the crime that had been committed. Dominic led his father to a chair and then turned to face the room. His gaze locked onto Cutler. He walked slowly toward the disgraced officer until he stood directly in front of him. He did not shout. He did not need to. His voice was a low, chilling whisper that cut through the silence. "Officer Cutler," Dominic began. "My name is Dominic Langston. I am the Attorney General. And that man you punched, that man you locked in a cage," he pointed to his father, "is Samuel Langston, a retired federal judge. My father." Cutler's face went completely white. He began to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shaking. At last he understood. He had not merely punched an old man. He had assaulted the father of the law itself. "You," Dominic continued, dropping his voice even lower into a venomous hiss, "are going to learn a very hard lesson. You are going to learn that some lines, once you cross them, you can never uncross." The promise hung in the air, the promise of a cold, methodical reckoning. "I want a screen," Dominic ordered, his voice carrying through the silent precinct. "And I want everyone to see." His agents moved with rapid efficiency. A large portable monitor was brought into the center of the room and connected to a hardened laptop. The screen lit up, and the murmurs of the detained officers died away. Every eye was fixed on the monitor. Dominic turned to his father. "Dad, you don't have to watch this again." Samuel shook his head, his expression grim. "No, let them all see. Let them see what they protect." The first file played. It was the dash camera recording from Cutler's patrol car, pristine and unedited, seized from the server moments before Cutler could destroy it. The video was clear, the audio sharp. The entire room watched the scene unfold. Samuel's polite, logical responses, Cutler's escalating aggression, Officer Riley's timid attempts to de-escalate. They heard Cutler growl, "I am the sign." They watched him pull the 72-year-old man from his car. And then they saw the punch, the sound, amplified by the speakers, made several officers in the room flinch. The image of Samuel's head, snapping back, the spray of blood against the purple silk, was brutal, cowardly, and undeniable. A collective groan swept the room. The local officers looked away in shame. This was not a gray area. This was not a he said, she said situation. This was a crime captured in high definition. "I wasn't defending himself," a young officer whispered, his voice full of disgust. "He didn't even raise his hands." The video continued. It showed Cutler screaming, "Assault on an officer," after he had already thrown the punch. It showed him handcuffing a man who offered no resistance. The lie was laid bare. The second file played. It was the rear seat audio from the patrol car. The room listened in horrified silence to Cutler's racist tirade, his baseless accusations that Samuel was a drug dealer. They heard Samuel's calm, methodical questioning of Officer Riley, and Riley's mumbled, complicit answers. The young officer standing against the wall looked as if he might vomit. He had chosen his side, and he had chosen wrong. "That," Dominic Langston said, pointing at the frozen image of Cutler's snarling face on the screen, "is not a police officer. That is a thug with a badge committing a hate crime." He turned his gaze back to Cutler, who was now weeping openly, his face a pathetic mask of terror and self-pity. "I didn't know," Cutler sobbed. "I swear to God, I didn't know who he was." "And that is your true crime," Dominic answered, his voice like a whip. "You think his identity is what made your actions wrong? You think if he had been a plumber, a janitor, or just some anonymous man without a powerful son, this would have been acceptable? You just confessed in front of 50 witnesses the essence of your own corruption." He stepped closer to Cutler. "You do not deserve to wear that uniform." He reached out and, with a single sharp motion, ripped the silver badge from Cutler's shirt. The sound of the metal pins tearing the fabric was shockingly loud. Then he tore the nameplate from the other side. He held the badge in the palm of his hand and let it drop to the floor, where it landed with a dull, metallic clink. The ultimate humiliation. Nathaniel Cutler was no longer an officer. He was simply a stripped criminal waiting for his cell. The days and weeks following the raid on the 4th Precinct were a whirlwind of methodical demolition. The station itself remained a federal crime scene, off limits to local police, and filled with state investigators and FBI agents. Attorney General Dominic Langston had kept his word. He was not merely cutting out a tumor. He was irradiating the entire area to ensure the cancer never returned. Every file from the previous decade was audited. Every excessive force complaint was reopened. A federal grand jury was convened, and the testimony was devastating. Sergeant O'Connell, charged with falsifying records, sang like a canary. He detailed a long-standing culture of corruption overseen by the precinct captain, a man who encouraged his officers to tax poorer neighborhoods with cash seizures and false charges. Officer Riley, terrified and facing the end of his career, agreed to testify against Cutler in exchange for a reduced charge. He had made the wrong choice in the moment, but now he was desperately trying to get back on the right side. The corruption ran deeper than expected. The investigation uncovered a slush fund, a direct link to City Hall, and a pattern of evidence concealment that was systemic rather than incidental. The precinct captain was indicted. 2 lieutenants were indicted. The mayor announced he would not seek re-election, citing health reasons, just one step ahead of federal charges. It was a complete cleansing. Dominic Langston worked with a cold, relentless fury. He was driven by a son's love and a prosecutor's zeal for justice. He visited his father every day. Samuel was recovering. The physical wounds healed faster than the emotional ones. He rarely spoke of the incident, but he followed the news of the investigation with a quiet, grim satisfaction. He watched as the law, the institution to which he had dedicated his life, slowly and painfully healed itself. One afternoon, 3 months after the arrest, Dominic convened a meeting in a borrowed conference room at the county courthouse. He had summoned a dozen officers from the now decimated 4th Precinct, the ones who, after extensive interviews, had been deemed clean. They were mostly younger officers who had kept a low profile and an impeccable record, who had been quietly disgusted by Cutler's methods, but too powerless to stop him. They sat nervously, unsure whether they were there to be fired or promoted. At the head of the table sat a woman in her 40s, Sergeant Maria Flores. She was a tough, no-nonsense cop with 15 years on the force and a reputation for unimpeachable integrity. She had filed a complaint against Cutler years earlier, which had earned her unofficial blacklisting by the old guard for promotions. Dominic Langston entered the room. "Thank you for coming," he said, getting straight to the point. "As you know, the 4th Precinct is being rebuilt from the ground up. It needs new leadership, leadership that understands the badge is a shield for the public, not a sword for the officer." He looked around the room, his gaze finally settling on Flores. "Sergeant Flores, when I reviewed the files, your name came up repeatedly. You have an impeccable record of de-escalation. You have more community commendations than anyone in this city. And you had the courage to stand up to Officer Cutler when no one else would. That is the kind of character this department needs." He paused. "Effective immediately, I am promoting you to captain of the 4th Precinct. Your mission is to rebuild it. Choose your command staff from the people in this room. Restore the trust that has been broken." A wave of shock swept the room. Flores stared at him, speechless. She had been sidelined for years, a pariah in her own department. Now the Attorney General himself was handing her the keys to the kingdom. Tears filled her eyes, but she held them back and straightened her back. "I will not let you down, sir," she said, her voice filled with a new iron determination. The old guard was gone. A new one had just been anointed. The long, difficult work of healing could finally begin. 6 months after the assault on Crestview Drive, the interior of a federal courtroom was silent and still. The air was thick with expectation. At the defense table, Nathaniel Cutler looked like an empty version of himself. He had lost weight, his skin was sallow, and his arrogant swagger had been replaced by a permanent look of anguish in his eyes. He wore a suit that no longer fit, a pathetic costume of respectability that could not hide the wreckage of his life. In the front row of the gallery, Samuel Langston sat with his son, Dominic. Samuel wore a simple, dark gray suit. The only touch of color was a small purple silk pocket square, a discreet act of defiance and remembrance. He was not there for revenge. He was there as a witness, to see the final chapter of this legal process through to its conclusion. The jury had delivered its verdict an hour earlier, guilty on all counts. Deprivation of rights under color of law, perjury, conspiracy. The words fell like hammer blows, each one sealing Cutler's fate. It was time for sentencing. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Helen Carter, looked down from the bench at the broken man at the defense table. "Mr. Cutler," she said in a voice devoid of compassion, "you have not only failed your community, you have dishonored the very idea of law enforcement. You took an oath to uphold the law, and you used it as a weapon to feed your own prejudice and rage." Cutler's attorney made a final, desperate plea for clemency, speaking of his family and his years of service, and calling the assault a terrible momentary lapse in judgment. Judge Carter remained unmoved. A momentary lapse does not involve a conspiracy to fabricate evidence or to suborn a fellow officer into committing perjury, she said. "The court will now hear the victim impact statement." Dominic gently squeezed his father's shoulder. Samuel rose and walked to the podium. He adjusted the microphone with steady hands. He did not look at the judge. He looked directly at Nathaniel Cutler. "Mr. Cutler," Samuel began in the calm, measured tone that had commanded courtrooms for decades. "I have spent 6 months thinking about what I would say to you today. Should I speak of the pain, the fear, the humiliation of being punched and arrested for a crime I did not commit? No, because this was never really about me." He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. This was about the people who could not call the Attorney General. This was about the countless people you harassed, intimidated, and assaulted, who had no recourse, whose complaints were thrown in the trash. I was simply the one you chose by mistake. Cutler finally looked up, eyes full of tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered, barely audible. "I'm so sorry." "I note your apology," Samuel said, his expression unchanged. "But your apology cannot repair the deep damage you have done to the trust between the people and the police. You became the very thing you swore to combat. You were the darkness. And for that, there must be an accounting." He turned to Judge Carter. "Your Honor, I did not come here today as a victim. I came as an officer of the court, a court that you now preside over. And I ask you to impose a sentence that sends a message not only to Mr. Cutler, but to any officer who believes the badge makes him a king. The law is a shield for everyone, or it is a weapon for a few. There is no middle ground. Samuel returned to his seat. The silence was absolute. Judge Carter looked at the sentencing guidelines, then at Cutler. "Nathaniel Cutler," she said in a firm voice, "for your crimes, for betraying your oath and your community, this court sentences you to 216 months in federal prison. 18 years." A collective gasp swept the courtroom. 18 years in a federal penitentiary where former police officers are fresh meat. It was, for all practical purposes, a life sentence. As the marshals led him away, Dominic Langston, a man who had just watched his father deliver justice, put his arm around his father's shoulders. In the end, the law had prevailed. The scales, once violently unbalanced, had been righted. 1 year later, the sun again cast its golden glow over Crestview Drive. The new community patrol car, AR of Captain Maria Flores, moved slowly down the street. Inside, a young rookie with barely 6 months on the job sat beside her. As they passed the oak tree, she pointed. "That spot," she said. "That's where it happened. We call it Langston Point." The rookie nodded. She had heard the story a dozen times at the academy. It was legend now. A warning that it was the place where a king in a purple shirt had toppled a corrupt kingdom with nothing but his dignity and the truth. They drove on, not as predators, but as guardians. Trust was not yet fully restored. That would take years, even a generation. But the work had begun. The wound was being healed. In his new home, Samuel Langston sat on the patio reading a book. The faint scar on his cheek was a permanent reminder, a silver line of memory. He no longer saw it as a mark of violence, but as a badge of honor, the price paid for a necessary lesson. He had taken the punch to prove that the shield of the law must protect everyone, or it protects no one. The system had bent, but it had not broken. With the help of good people, it had corrected itself. It proved that accountability is not a gift. It is a right that must be demanded, sometimes at great personal cost. What do you think of the 18-year sentence? Was it fair or too severe? What would you have done in Samuel Langston's place? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story of justice reminded you that no one is above the law, hit the like button and subscribe for more important stories.